All right. Hello, everybody. I'm here today with Professor Tim Shao of Florida Southwestern State College and Florida Coast University. Already starting off with some tongue twisters there. Today we're talking about, or I want to talk about, where our rights derive from. Today we hear so much about rights based on behavior, rights based on groups. We hear a lot about human rights, gay rights, reproductive rights. When people use the term rights, it seems to be completely unhinged today in contemporary discourse, certainly among the left, some libertarians and conservatives, from any sort of moral philosophy. So my first question to you is where are these rights, or where do the rights, let's look at the Declaration of Independence, where it says, we are endowed with our Creator by certain unalienable rights. And they call them these self-evident truths. Where are these rights stemming from? Are they making them up out of whole cloth?
Well, on the natural law view, at least, the natural law view of the founders and many of the philosophers on which they based the ideas of the Declaration.
Who are those? Who are some of those philosophers? Is it like the ancients? Is it the scholastic philosophers? Is it the Enlightenment? Is it a combination of all three?
I'd say it's a combination. There's a lot of Lockean ideas, but there's also a lot of concepts that you could arguably trace back to Aristotle and Aquinas.
Okay.
Now, based on these thinkers, natural rights, rights derive from nature, and nature is God. So, and I guess the nuances of this will vary from thinker to thinker. But for somebody like Locke, natural rights come from basically God's giving us rights. Aristotle and Aquinas wouldn't so much disagree with that, but they'd also add nature in as a intermediary. So we have rights because we were created to function a certain way, and we were created to function a certain way because there is a creator who gave us those rights.
So what you're saying is Locke specifically focuses on the creator and kind of eschews nature, or are you saying that and Aristotle and Aquinas kind of fill that in? They talk about the God that created nature, and then from there nature gives purpose. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, many of the natural law theorists after Aquinas tended to downplay the concept of nature. You still had this robust conception of natural rights, natural law, but it didn't really have that much to do with nature in that our proper functioning, the idea of an essence or nature, didn't play that much role in the grounding of it, right? Whereas somebody like Aquinas would say that we have rights because we should function a certain way, and so rights are claims to what we need to function in a certain way.
So what does that mean when you say rights, that we were created for a reason and that we were made to function in a certain way? How does that lead to property rights or my right to life? Are you saying that, as a human being, I have a right to property for what purpose?
Right. So it's nice to focus on this language of purpose, because a lot of people tend to focus just on rights as the ability just to do whatever you want with your life. So they divorce the concept of a right from a responsibility. The rights have always been tied to obligations, things that we need to do. So the idea of a right is a claim to something that we need in order to fulfill our duty. So we need private property because without something to call our own, we can't fulfill that which we are meant to do, namely flourish. And so rights, whether it be private property, whether it be food or drink, whether it be self-defense, all of these rights are rights because they are claims for things we need to do our moral duty.
So you're saying that you mentioned a right to flourish or the purpose to flourish. You're saying that I have private property rights because it induces me to create, to innovate, to acquire the essential things necessary for life, right? Also for trade, right? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, that's how the natural. I guess that's how the natural law philosophers would justify property rights. So property rights are very strong in that we really do need all these things in order to get a foothold, to flourish, to provide for our families, and so on. But property rights on the natural view are not absolute. They're not. They don't. There are situations in which your right to own a property could give way.
And I want to talk
if
about that in a second, but I want to stay basic. I do want to talk about that. I want to talk about natural law ethics and civil society, but I want to hold off. I just want to lay down the foundation of where these rights do come from.
Right.
So the right to life, right? I have the right to life because obviously I was created to live. I mean, I was given a heart, lungs, blood, arms, eyes, reason in order to do something, which was survive. So no other human being can take that away from me, correct? Because the life was given to me by nature or by nature's God, right?
Right.
Okay. So that makes sense. So my purpose, obviously, if I'm here, my purpose is to live, not to die. That's why most people see somebody who's passed away or somebody who's dying as upsetting, correct?
And not just live in general, but live in a certain way. So the natural law view is perfectionistic in the sense that not all ways of life are created equal. We are meant to use our life. We are meant to use our autonomy to choose a certain way of life that's conducive to who we are as human beings. And so that's why we have life, not so that we can use life for just anything we want, but so that we can use life in the way it was intended to be used.
Okay, so just to get a clear understanding from the standpoint of life and purpose, what you're saying is if tomorrow I said, you know what, I want to walk on my hands. My hands are my feet. And that's how I'm going to go about my life. I would actually be kind of going against nature, correct? That wouldn't be the correct way to live. That would kind of be, I would be at a disadvantage and I would have a hard time flourishing if I were to do so, correct?
Correct. Nature has endowed us with reason, with certain abilities, capacities, potentialities, and all of these are meant to be used a certain way. You can give the biological example. Seeing is we have eyes so we can see. We breathe so we can oxygenate our blood. We eat so we can nourish our body. And so all of our activities should be used, or we should act in ways that are beneficial to who we are as human beings. And so a choice of a lifestyle choice that is detrimental to our flourishing would not be an acceptable way of life from the natural law.
Doing drugs, right? Doing drugs in pursuit of, I don't know, a high, right? Just being high is kind of destructive. So that goes against man's nature, correct?
Right. Yeah, doing drugs for the sake of getting that mind inhibiting high actually frustrates the very thing that makes us human, namely our rationality. So something like the hedonistic pursuit of pleasure, that can't be good for us because it interferes with the functioning of what makes us human, namely our ability to reason.
Okay, that's interesting. So now I want to discuss morality, and it seems that like a lot of libertarians live by the non-aggression principle, which is kind of a rehashing of John Stuart Mill's harm principle. And I want to talk about where, they always say you can't legislate morality, but isn't that what the whole government is founded on, morality? I mean, the Declaration of Independence is just outlining a moral code, and the Constitution's putting it into law. It's essentially legislating morality, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you bring up Mill's harm principle, because Mill says, the only reason for which power can be exercised over another person is to prevent harm to others, something like that. Now, the idea of harm itself, harm is a moral concept. I mean, you can't speak of harm unless you have an idea of how human beings should be, what our proper functioning should be. So even Mill's harm principle rests on some prior conception of morality. So it's not as if you can have a system of law, even adopting Mill's view, that's completely value free.
Is it now? Let's say we did adopt which is NAP, the non-aggression principle, which is, I mean, directly kind of taken from Mill's harm principle. Isn't that legislating morality? That's just, you're just taking one moral code, which is natural law, and replacing it with the non-aggression principle. You're doing the same exact thing. So this trope of, you can't legislate morality is largely just a vacuous phrase, correct?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. All appeals to harm, all appeals to autonomy, all appeals to equality. They rest on some prior moral framework. And so the question is not so much, do we legislate morality, but whose morality do we legislate? And the natural law answer is we legislate the morality that's common for everybody, the natural law.
So you're saying that the harm presupposes an ends, a purpose, right? If you're harming something, that means you're derailing it from its ultimate ends of flourishing, correct?
Yeah, a harm is just a setback to a being's welfare, a being's flourishing. And so you can't speak of a setback to something's flourishing unless you have some idea of how we should be flourishing to begin with. And so if you want to make the argument that, well, we shouldn't allow this because it's harmful, then what theory of flourishing, what theory of well-being are you appealing to? Because we have to have one in order to make any kind of appeal to harm.
So my next question to you is all these moral codes. So morality, cannot be quantified by mathematics, correct? It can't be, I don't know, proven by physics alone, like how a plane takes off, things like that. You could prove that from the nature of physics. But what about? But for a moral standpoint, how do you prove that murder is bad? I can't take out figures and numbers from an economic standpoint. I can't run a model telling you, why killing is wrong or why rape is wrong or incest. Is that does that apply that certain amount of purpose? Does that apply to a broader moral code?
So an interesting thing about morality is that you can't touch it, you can't taste it, you can't feel it, you can't see it. Like your right to life, for example.
So it must not exist
touch
then, right?
Your right to life.
If it's not tangible,
yeah, I mean,
it must not exist.
That's the argument that some people make. So if you read J.L. Mackie, he gives this what he calls the queerness argument. Moral values, if they exist, he said, would be very weird sorts of entities, and so they don't fit in the universe, and so therefore they probably don't exist. Now, you might just think that Mackie is begging the question here. He's just starting from a very mechanistic conception of nature, a conception of nature in which you don't have values built in. And on the natural law view, you can, locate values in nature in the sense that, when we look at any biological organism, any living organism, we see that there are conditions for their flourishing and conditions for their not flourishing. So, for example, if you don't water a tree, the tree's not going to, it's going to wither. It's going to be a bad tree. If, by contrast, you fertilize it, give it the proper amount of water, it'll be called a good tree. So we make these good, bad, evaluative judgments, not just in morality, but in nature in general. So
let me just stop you right there.
Morality is...
Let me just stop you. You just said good, bad. Everybody makes a moral claim on a daily basis. Everybody does. I don't care whether they're making it based on scientific research, evaluations, if they're doing it based on, quantities and so mathematics or physics. You're making a truth claim whether one thing is at most times good or bad. And I'll give you economics. I say that capitalism is a more good system than, say, socialism, that it is more efficient in allocating scarce resources with alternative uses. I can show that using the numbers, using graphs, and so on and so forth. Am I making a moral claim when I do that?
So moral claims, what makes a claim a moral claim? What is good for a tree to be good?
Are you there? I think you froze. I think you froze. Shoot. That's okay. If you can hear me, I will just reboot.